The Alpha King thought his trap was flawless. Silk words, a poisoned kiss, a game only he could win. But when she met his gaze, the snare turned on its maker. His control cracked, his wolf bowed, and the crown itself began to tremble. What kind of love makes a god bleed? Love was never supposed to be her weapon, yet she used it to bring a king to his knees. Tell me, was it justice or mercy? Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe if you believe even monsters can fall in love. They said the Alpha King could break any heart with a glance and never bleed for it. That was before he met Ira Lorne, the maiden he invited to court under the guise of mercy. She'd trespassed on sacred ground, and his council demanded her punishment. Instead, Cale offered her a place among his courtiers, a kindness so calculated it glittered like a snare. She didn't know she was bait, he didn't know she was truth. The first night, his charm was weapon. The second, it was shield. By the third, the king who ruled by control found himself haunted by her silence, because her silence saw him. Now the palace walls whisper, the girl who was meant to fall has unmade the one who set the trap. And every lie Cale told to keep her near draws him closer to the one thing his bloodline forbids. A love strong enough to undo the crown. They opened the palace to her the way a story opens, on a gasp and a hush. One moment Ira was in the saddle, with mud drying in star-stitched streaks on her hem. The next, black iron gates spilled apart, and a road of white stone lifted her toward a fortress that wasn't a fortress at all, but a constellation stitched to earth. Lanterns burned like bottled moons along colonnades of frost glass and bone-white marble. Wind carried the clean bite of snowmelt and cedar. Somewhere, unseen, a river moved with the muted strength of something that had survived 1,000 winters and expected to survive 1,000 more. She expected iron, she got silk. She expected chains. She found hands, steady, careful, almost reverent, guiding her down, then falling back as if proximity were a sin. "Lady," murmured the steward, at the bottom of the steps, a spare man with hair like new steel and eyes that wouldn't meet hers. "Welcome to Northspire." Lady, not prisoner. Era's grip tightened on the worn leather satchel at her side. The satchel had more seams than strength, and still held the last scraps of her old life. A ribbon, a chipped charm, a page torn from a prayer book, and folded so many times the words had become a soft, thin leaf. She slid it behind her hip, as though the palace might try to read her through it. Inside, silence wore slippers. No clatter of boots, no barked orders. Footmen and maids arranged themselves along the walls like candle flames that knew better than to sway. She moved between them and felt, absurdly, like a storm being asked to behave. The corridors took her breath without stealing it. Vaulted ceilings ribbed like the belly of a whale. Tapestries where wolves ran through snowbound forests that moved when you weren't looking. Floors of veined stone so polished the moon laid itself twice. Every turn offered something no one from her village could have imagined. A bowl cut from a single amethyst, a staircase that seemed woven from air, a mural of a woman in a halo of nightlight, palm raised, wolves kneeling. "Who is she?" Ira asked, and hated the small reverence in her voice. "An old story," the steward said, as if stories were both currency and contraband. "This way." They did not drag her, they did not shove, they led. past a set of doors carved with sleep-bright beasts and silver stars. They brought her to a chamber that belonged to someone who had known how to want. A fire already lived there, steady and sure in a hearth of dark stone. Furs lay at the foot of a bed big enough to hold a winter. Glass vials glittered on a mirrored table. Oils scented with pine, wolfbane's bitter cousin, the faint sugar of pressed cloudberries. A window cut from the wall framed the horizon, where mountains wore the moon like a lover. Era didn't move farther than the threshold. This was a trap built with silk rope. Clothes have been prepared, a woman said gently. Her voice had the steadiness of someone who had sung children through fevers and men through nightmares. She checked herself, eyes to the floor, throat working, and added, "Your Majesty," then swallowed the word and replaced it with, "My lady." Your Majesty. Era's skin prickled. She looked around as if the title had been released into the air and might bite. "I'm not," she began. The woman's hands fluttered, a bird deciding against flight. "Forgive me. You're to be treated with care." The word fit in her ear like a coin she didn't own. Era nodded once and stepped in. The weight of the palace pressed from all sides. The way snow presses an evergreen into a deeper green. A copper bath steamed beyond a screen painted with frost flowers, and when the attendants reached for the laces of her cloak, she fought the urge to flinch. Their fingers were quick and respectful. Mud fell from the hem with a soft, embarrassed sound. When they lowered her into the water, heat climbed her shins, her thighs, the scar at her side that remembered a different night, a different set of hands, a different kind of fire. "Does the water burn?" the older woman asked. "It stings," Era said. "That's not the same." "You speak like someone who has learned to live with pain." Era's laugh was small and not kind. "You work in a palace. Surely you've learned the same." Steam unspooled the aches from her muscles. She tilted her head back, let water curl around her ears until the room's sounds went underwater. Murmurs muttering into whale song, the crackle of the fire becoming rain. Her eyes closed. A face rose unbidden. A crown that looked like a wound, eyes the color of midnight over snow. A mouth written in iron. Kael Draven had not laid a hand on her since the clearing. In the moonlight's ring of bluestone, he had looked at her like a question only he was allowed to ask. The memory burned and cooled, warming her from the bones outward. When she opened her eyes, the attendants were offering cloth, soft as a long-kept promise. "Your supper?" the steward asked once she stood wrapped in wool, the color of smoke. "I don't know when the last time I ate was," Era said lightly. "So now seems safe." Servants moved like choreography around a small table near the window. A roasted trout, flesh collapsing beneath its own steam. Bread still breathing yeast. Bowls of barley studded with pearl onions. A dish of winter greens, slicked with garlic. A cup bright with something that smelled like apples and knife-cold evenings. She ate because her body insisted, and because refusing would be the wrong kind of defiance. Between bites, she studied the fabrics, the seams, the pauses in conversation. The palace's power was not only in what it contained, but in what it refused to do. It refused to hurry. It refused to show force when suggestion would do. When she finished, the older woman poured a few drops of oil, pine and something medicinal, into her palms. then rubbed the slick warmth across Era's knuckles, as if rains had taught them a language the palace did not speak. "What do I call you?" Era asked. "Matra," the woman said, "if it pleases you. I have tended this wing since the winter the river froze all the way to the sea." "How many winters is that?" "Enough to remember what it costs to keep a place beautiful." Era tucked that away. A place this polished required tireless gentleness or brutal effort, probably both. "Will he come?" she asked, careful to keep her voice flat. Matra's hands paused for a breath, then resumed. "He is our king. He does what storms do." "That means yes. That means you shouldn't wait up," Matra said, and Era almost smiled. When they left her, closing the doors with a softness that felt like conspiracy, Era crossed to the window. The north lay quiet in its white violence. Pine, snow, stars, the hard-shouldered mountains. A wolf loped the courtyard's perimeter, pawing to nose the air, then disappearing into a pocket of shadow like a thought withdrawn before it could become dangerous. She pressed her palm to the glass. Cold numbed the ache behind her ribs. She could taste iron when she breathed in. The scent of old battle kept too clean. Below, a cloaked figure crossed the inner court. The gate was unmistakable. Contained power, the kind that didn't flex unless necessary, and even then only as an economy. Kael Draven. He did not look up. Good, she told herself. Better. She found the small prayer niche tucked into the wall near the hearth. The masonry formed a shallow alcove no bigger than a cradle. Above it, a disk of moonstone had been set, catching firelight and breaking it into milk. Someone had left offerings on the ledge. A strip of blue cloth, a tooth polished by thumb smoothing, a sprig of something that smelled like fear and spring. Era knelt. She had prayed on dirt floors and in broom closets and under beds, in the backs of wagons and the bellies of barns. Palaces had no monopoly on God, but kneeling here, her knees on a cushion that had been embroidered by hands that had never bled on pine, felt like making a promise in velvet. It was too easy to be good when nothing cut you. She bowed her head anyway. "Lady of Night," she whispered, voice barely a seam between breaths. "You have always loved the quiet ones. I have been quiet as bone. If you are guiding me, I will go where your light breaks. If this is a trap, show me the teeth." The room kept breathing around her, fire, snow, some crackle that might have been wood, or might have been something truer in the walls. Era closed her eyes until the world pressed against them in silver. On the far side of the chamber, a door cut from the shadows and stitched back into them without sound. He entered without crossing the threshold. Kael remained in the dark, as if stepping into firelight might be a confession. His shoulders took up the space the door refused to. Snow had powdered his hair at the edges of his hood. Meltwater caught at his jaw and trembled rather than fall. He had come to see if the snare held. He had not expected a woman praying for teeth. Era did not turn. The prayer curled into silence. She felt him before she heard him. The way a storm declares itself without thunder turds, in pressure, in the quiet that stutters. The hair along her arms rose and made their own decision to listen. "Matra told me you do what storms do," she said. "If I had come as a storm, you would be ash," he said, his voice made of what winter uses to sharpen itself. "And yet here I kneel." "And yet," he said, He moved closer, one step, a generosity of restraint. The fire made a low, contented sound, as if admitting a rival it respected. The air took on a brightness she hadn't noticed before. Her skin remembered the clearing, the ritual circle, the moment the moon shocked itself white. "Why do they treat me like this?" Era asked, "as if I might break, or as if they might." "Because they don't know which it will be," he said. "You know?" She lifted her chin. The moonstone above the niche gave her a halo she didn't deserve. "No." He let the word own the room a heartbeat longer than a lie would have allowed. "But I'm learning." She rose from the cushion and turned. A distance, the length of a wolf's body, lay between them. And in it, a field of unsaid things grew tall. He kept his hands at his sides. She kept hers open, a language he could read if he had learned any besides command. "You did not touch me today," she said. "Must I list the things I did not do?" He sounded tired in that way some men only sound when they're telling the truth. "It surprised me." Her mouth curved, not in softness, but in acknowledgement. Most traps snap. Most prey thrashes. His gaze flicked to her satchel on the chair, then back. He had noticed everything in the room. "You do neither." "Perhaps I am not prey." "Perhaps," he had, and the word held a shadow of respect that startled them both. Another quiet, the kind you cannot buy. It allowed the small sounds to introduce themselves. A candle giving up a last hiss as its wick pooled, a wolf's howl clipped short by obedience at the edge of the court, the wind's finger on the glass. "Do you fear me?" he asked finally. "Yes," she said, "but not like they think." "How then?" "Not like a knife," she said, "more like a river. You don't fear a river because it is cruel. You fear it because it does not stop being itself just because you are drowning." He exhaled, a sound almost like surprise into laughter. It softened nothing. It made the iron in him ring purer. "Sleep," he said. "If dreams come, let them come. If they show teeth, Matra is outside the door. If they show me, wake anyway. And if they show you as you were in the clearing," she asked, "then you already know how to wake," he told her. He went as he had come, measuring the distance between them with the care of a man who had learned the cost of miscalculation. When the door sealed him out, the space he had occupied kept the shape of him like heat keeps the shape of a hand after it has been withdrawn. Era stood a long moment. Then she crossed to the window, pulled the curtain just enough to see the inner court again. The cloaked figure had become a man with his hood thrown back, face turned up to the slice of moon. A scar ran along his cheekbone like a thread that had been pulled too hard and then knotted. She watched him grime a knuckle across his jaw, as if trying to scrub the night off. He would not stop being himself for her. She could not stop being herself for him. The bed was an argument she did not have the strength to win. Era slid beneath furs that smelled like the breath of the beasts that had given them. She lay on her side, palm on her belly, as if it contained a compass. Sleep found her, as the tide finds an abandoned boat. Inevitability without apology. Outside, the palace remembered how to breathe without being watched. He did not go far. The hall outside her chamber knew his footfall and adjusted its echoes for him. Kael stood where a column met a shadow and decided that standing was what a man did when he had no right to act and no permission to do nothing. She had prayed. He had heard the prayer without hearing it, the way a wolf hears snow. He lifted a hand to his chest without thinking. The mark there, the royal sigil that had been his since the ritual waters slicked his new-grown skin, warmed under his palm. It had behaved all his life like a brand behaves, a claim the crown makes on flesh. In the clearing, under the blood moon's tempered rage, the mark had burned, then cooled. Then, for a staggered instant, as he held a stranger's wrist and said 4 words older than his father's line, it had become absence. He remembered the absence now, as a phantom limb remembers the blade. "Your Majesty," Matra's voice was the knock of an old friend who does not pretend to be a stranger. "Shall I post wolves at her door, Git?" "They do not need posting," he said. "They already know." Matra's silence was agreement and a prayer. "The council asks for a word in the morning." "They will have it," he said. "And what word will it be?" "Not the one they want," he said, and heard in his own answer the first honest thing he would say to the council in a decade. When she had first stepped through the palace's mouth, Kael had watched from the balcony above the entry hall, half-shadowed, wholly decided on who she was meant to be. A symbol he could use, a smoke his enemies could choke on, a sweetness to distract a wolf while you reset the snare. Her posture had unsettled him. That straightness that belonged only to people who had earned it in private and did not know how not to carry it in public. The way she had refused to flinch under the palace's gentleness. His power did not bend her. His presence did not break her. Something old, older than the curse, older than the throne, shifted under his ribs like an animal standing up. He stayed outside her door until the corridor's candles lowered themselves to coals. When he finally went to his own rooms, he stripped the cold off his hands with heat and sat on the edge of a bed that had never quite learned to hold him. His chest felt tight in a way battle never made it feel. He pulled his tunic over his head, and the mark, branded into him when he was 13 in a rite that ate and rebuilt boys, took the cold like a dare. Blue. It happened the first time like doubt, a shimmer, a suggestion. He frowned and squinted at his own skin as if he were going blind or sane. The sigil, a wolf's head crowned, jaws slightly open around a crescent, usually glowed a disciplined gold when challenged, the color of command burning. Now, as he sat with the night's silence lodged between his shoulder blades, the mark warmed again. And then it bloomed, the gold diluting until something the color of midnight fire, the strange electric blue of glacier heart ice lit by lightning, rose from beneath his skin. He stared. He did not call for anyone. He did not move. The glow brightened when his thoughts touched her. It steadied when he forced his mind to ice. It pulsed, almost a second heartbeat, when he let himself remember the prayer curve of her spine, the steadiness in her voice when she asked God for teeth. Kael swore once, with the arrangements of sacrilege known only to kings. His door stayed closed. He lay back out of respect for the sudden sway in his body, out of contempt for his own surprise. The ceiling beams had been carved to look like the underbodies of wolves, ribs arced like the inside of a wave. He stared at them until the night smoothed. On the other side of a walls as old as the claim he carried, she turned in sleep. The wind tested the windows with long fingers. The river went about its business. The mark on his chest glowed again. blue as a story no priest could bless. And then, as if embarrassed by its own honesty, dimmed. He slept the way a man sleeps at the edge of a cliff, because the view is better there. Era woke once in the black seam between night and dawn, the seam where you unspool into something softer, or you pull tight against it. She could not name what woke her. Not fear, not exactly. It was a sense, the way a house knows when someone has lit a candle 2 rooms away. She rolled onto her back, eyes open to the ceiling's hush. On the table near the window, the little moonstone offering disc wore a thin skirl of light. Not white, not gold. A color the night makes when it forgives you for surviving it. She put a hand to her own shoulder without knowing why. Heat lived there. Deep, not painful. As if something had been stamped into her, and the ink had finally decided to introduce itself. Teeth, she whispered into the darkness, not pleading now, not bargaining. Show me the teeth again, I will count them. Sleep took her smiling like a threat. At first light, when Matra came with tea that smelled like forests and a blade to cut the day cleanly, she paused at the threshold, eyes narrowing. Did you leave a lamp lit, my lady? No. Then the moon is behaving strangely, Matra said, which was a palace way of saying something is not as it was. Era tucked the observation under her tongue. She had a mouthful of such things now. The palace shifted toward morning. Footsteps. The far muffled thunder of barracks coming awake. Somewhere beyond stone, a horn called and was answered. Era rose, the fur slipping from her shoulders like a blessing she refused to hoard, and crossed to the window. Below, the king stood in the courtyard, bare-chested in the dawn, breath breaking in pale flags in front of him. A half-circle of soldiers waited at a distance, neither servile nor foolish. He lifted his palm to the cold and let it bite him. When he turned, the new light caught his torso. Her breath went wrong in her throat. On his chest, just over the heart, the mark glowed. Blue. As if the night had written something true on him, and daylight had not yet remembered how to lie. Era's hand went to the spot on her own shoulder, where heat had lived in the dark. The wolves outside pivoted in unison, noses raised toward the high window she stood in. They did not bow, not yet. But they looked, and held the looking, as if a new command had entered the world and were teaching them its grammar. Era stepped back from the glass. The day was ready to ask its questions. The night had already given its answers. The storm broke without thunder, just silence too heavy to breathe through. From the high balcony of the northern palace, the world looked carved from frost and bone. The ice fields stretched for miles, a glass sea that caught the moon and made it bleed white fire. Wolves howled somewhere far below, their cries torn thin by the wind. The sound climbed the walls like grief. Era stood alone at the balustrade, her shawl fluttering in the cold like a ghost that hadn't decided whether to leave. The servants had gone an hour ago, leaving her to the hush of a place too large for human noise. She had refused the firelight. She liked the dark. The dark didn't ask questions. Behind her, the doors opened with a sigh that didn't belong to hinges. Kael Draven moved as though the night itself parted to make room for him. No armor, no crown, no guards. Only the silver clasp at his throat caught the moonlight, marking him not as a king, but as something older, something the moon itself might have named once. He watched her for a moment before speaking. Her silhouette was a line drawn too cleanly against the cold. "I thought you'd be asleep," he said. "I was," she replied without turning. "The wind woke me." It sounded like it was remembering something. Kael stepped closer. His boots made no sound against the stone, yet she knew exactly where he was. Her body reacted to his nearness before her mind did, the way prey feels the air shift when the predator pauses to look. "Does the wind remember?" he asked. Era glanced over her shoulder. "Everything does if you listen long enough." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat he forgot his next line. She wasn't supposed to look at him like that, with curiosity, not fear. Most people looked at him and saw crown, fangs, danger. She looked at him and saw answers. He hated how that made him want to offer some. "You shouldn't be out here," he said finally. "The cold can kill even the strong." "Then why are you here?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Because I brought you here." Era smiled, barely a curve of her lips, but it cut deeper than any blade. "And you always watch what you cage?" Kael stepped beside her, both hands resting on the railing. The air between them pulsed with quiet violence. "I watch what I don't understand." "And do you, sir?" He turned his head slowly, his profile carved sharp in moonlight. "Not yet." The wind coiled between them, tasting of iron and snow. Below, the frozen river glowed faintly blue, mirroring the light that had burned across his chest the night before. It still hummed beneath his skin now, a secret heartbeat that refused to fade. He had brought her here for a reason. He needed to see it. What kind of creature she truly was. A pawn? A curse? Or something worse? The one thing the Alpha King could never control. "You must have questions," he said at last. Era's eyes lingered on the horizon. "Only one." "Ask it." "Why me?" There it was, the question he'd been waiting for. The one he'd rehearsed his answer to in the dark, shaping it into a weapon wrapped in sympathy. He could use this. He could turn it. "You were at the glade," he began softly. "On the night of the blood rite. You shouldn't have been. No one without royal blood can even enter those woods. And yet..." His gaze flicked to her face, measuring her stillness. "You walked through the wards as if they were mist." "I didn't know," she said. "You didn't need to know," Kaelor murmured. "The moon chose you. That's what it does. It finds weakness and dresses it up as destiny." She looked at him now, eyes calm but sharp. "So this is destiny then? Being locked in a palace until you decide what I am?" "I decide nothing," he said too quickly. "The curse decides," on her brow furrowed. "Curse?" Kael turned away, resting his palms against the stone. The cold bit at his skin, grounding him. "Every Alpha King carries it. A law older than our thrones, written in blood long before I was born." Era's voice softened, curious despite herself. "What law?" "That no Alpha King may love without losing control." The words hung there, crystalline and fragile. The kind of truth that cut when it hit the air. He hadn't planned to tell her that part. But he watched her face, watched how pity might flicker there, and waited. He wanted to see her flinch, to see her step closer out of mercy, because mercy was the easiest chain of all. Era, however, did not move. She studied him with the quiet of someone reading a map only she could understand. So love makes you dangerous, she said. He almost smiled. Love makes me weak. The throne demands control, the curse ensures I never lose it. And yet, she said, eyes narrowing slightly, you brought me here. Kael's gaze sharpened. Be careful, Era. Why? She asked. Because I see what you're doing. Her voice wasn't cruel, but it hit him like it was. You tell me your curse, she continued, stepping closer. So I'll pity you. So I'll try to soothe what you think is broken. But it isn't love you fear, Kael Draven, dear. She stopped just shy of him, their breath mingling in the cold. It's being seen. The words hit harder than the winter wind. Kael went very still. For years he had spoken to generals, traitors, prophets. None had ever dared to strip him bare with nothing but truth. Era watched him as if testing a theory. Your control isn't strength, it's armor. You wear it so no one can tell how much you're bleeding underneath. He should have laughed. Should have crushed her words beneath his title, reminded her that he was not a man to be read like scripture. But her voice, low, certain, unafraid, sounded like something older than defiance. And she wasn't wrong. He'd spent years convincing himself that no one could touch the parts of him still human, that the crown had burned that weakness out. But her eyes, soft, relentless, seemed to see through every scar, every wall, every lie. He took a step forward, too close now, his shadow swallowing hers. You think you understand me? No, she whispered. I think you don't. The breath between them trembled. Somewhere in the palace, a clock tolled once. An echo, a warning. Kael reached out before he realized he'd moved. His fingers brushed her chin, just enough to tilt her face toward him. Heat licked across his palm. Her skin was warm, alive, maddeningly unafraid. For a heartbeat, the curse flared inside him. The old wolf stirring, demanding obedience. His pulse roared in his ears. Power coiled under his skin, begging to be unleashed. And then she looked up at him, not like a subject before her king, but like a storm meeting its equal. Kael dropped his hand as if burned. Era didn't flinch, she only whispered, You fear love because it's the one thing you can't command. He turned away sharply, fists clenched, breath ragged. Enough! The word came out more like a plea than a command. Era took a small step back, her face unreadable. Then stop asking questions you don't want answered. The wind howled across the balcony, scattering frost into silver dust. Kael's eyes flashed in the half-dark, gold bleeding into storm grey. For the first time since the rite, the king looked uncertain, human. Dangerous in a different way. Era inclined her head slightly, the gesture soft but final. Good night, Your Majesty. She walked past him, her scent, jasmine and winter fire, trailing through the cold. The doors closed behind her, with a soft, almost regretful sound. Kael stood there long after she'd gone. The ice fields glowed faintly blue under the moon. He pressed a hand against his chest. The mark beneath his skin throbbed, once, twice, then flared, answering something he didn't understand. In the glass reflection, he saw his eyes, no longer the steady gold of control, but flickering with traces of the same blue fire that had once bound them under the moon. He exhaled, slow, shaking his head. "She's just a girl," he muttered. "A girl with no name, no power." But the words died halfway. Because even now, the bond pulsed, her heartbeat matching his, whispering through his blood like a secret spell. When he finally slept, the dream came. Not of her face, but of her voice, of her words. "You don't fear love. You fear being seen." He dreamed of her standing on a field of shattered moonlight, eyes silver, her hand pressed to his mark as wolves bowed behind her. He tried to wake, but couldn't. The dream held him, tight as a vow. When he finally tore free, the moon outside was red again, and his mark, still glowing blue, beat like a living heart beneath his skin. And for the first time in his reign, the Alpha King of the North was afraid. Snow fell like ash from an old fire, soft, endless, impossible to stop. By the time Kale reached the eastern colonnade, the world had narrowed to 3 sounds: his boot steps, the hush of falling white, and the steady drum beneath his ribs that was not entirely his. He did not quicken or slow. A king never hurried. But the wolves shadowing the parapets above raised their heads as he passed, noses tilted to the wind, as if the night itself had acquired a new scent. Tonight, he had promised himself, would be the end of it. The end of the uncertainty, the asking, the small domestic kindnesses that had crept uninvited into the cold fortress of his habits. He did not intend violence. He meant only to press, to lean his will into hers until whatever strangeness had sprung from the moonride bowed until she bowed. A gentle breaking, like frost under a heel. He found her in the winter gallery, where ancient banners slept behind glass, and the floor was a lake of polished stone. She stood with her hands folded, eyes closed, listening to the snow tap the windows. No guards, no attendants, just a girl from nowhere drawing breath in a palace built on blood. "Era," he said. Her eyes opened. Majesty. No fear, no anger. Only the kind of tired quiet that made him feel suddenly, irrationally, like an intruder in his own hall. "You sleep little," he observed. "You dream loudly," she said. He paused. "I see." "You feel," she corrected gently. "You haven't let yourself do that for a very long time." He should have laughed. Instead, he crossed the gallery and stopped an arm's length away. The light from the snow cast her in silver, the kind of light that makes liars of men who claim they do not believe in saints. "There are terms," he said. "You understand them." "Do I?" "You will remain here. You will obey my guards. You will not leave the East Wing without my leave. And you will answer when I ask." Her lips quirked. "What happens if I don't?" He stepped closer. "Then I make you." The air tightened. The wolves went still above, 8 shadows carved against the sky, ears pricked. Era did not move. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening for a distant bell. "That's what you keep telling yourself," she murmured. "That you can make anything bend." The words slipped under his skin like a needle. "I can." "You have mistaken obedience for faith," she said softly. "They are not the same. Faith is for priests. Faith is for wolves," she said, and the word came out with an old resonance that startled him. "Faith is what keeps them at your side when hunger would send them elsewhere." He inhaled to answer, and the bond bristled, sudden and bright. like someone tugging a thread knotted to his heart. He felt ridiculous, off balance. The urge rose to reach for her, to prove she was the source and he the master. Enough! It came out harsher than he intended. He lifted his hand, not to strike, not even to touch, just to show her what power felt like when directed. His aura, leashed, controlled, honed over years of rule, rolled from him in a disciplined wave, the kind that made generals straighten and challengers drop their eyes. Era did not look away. The pressure touched her and slid off like rain on oiled leather. For a heartbeat, he saw it. Something older answering in her blood. Not resistance. Recognition. Like two notes from different instruments finding the same pitch. He pushed harder. The banners shivered on their poles. Frost dusted the glass. Far above, a wolf whined, uneasy. Era's lashes trembled. She took one step back and sank to her knees, not in capitulation, but as if bracing the earth with herself. Her palms flattened to the stone. She closed her eyes, and the snowlight flared along her cheekbones, lifting the fine hairs on Kael's arms. A fragrance threaded the cold, wild thyme and winter mint, the veil in spring. Yield, he said. No, she whispered. John, not to the part of you that is afraid. He didn't know when his own knees bent. He only knew suddenly they had, and that he was kneeling across from her, breath fanning white between them, fury and wonder warring behind his ribs. This is not a game. It never was. Something in him snapped then. Not a temper, not a leash. Something subtler, long tensed. He reached across the small distance, intent on ending the argument with touch, with skin, with the old law of claiming that had never failed a king. His fingers brushed the notch of her throat. Pain hit like lightning. Kael sucked air through his teeth, vision white. Not pain like a wound. Pain like a door ripped open in the dark and a storm walking in. His mark, the royal sigil etched beneath his breastbone since his first moon, erupted in heat. Not the red gold of wolf fire. A strange, impossible blue that ran along his veins like molten ice. The light bled through skin, flooding his palm, spilling into the space between them until the floor itself glowed. Era gasped. Her head snapped back as if a thread had yanked it, and her breath came in with a broken sound that turned his spine to glass. He grabbed for her shoulders and the pain doubled, then trebled. Each flare an echo that traveled a path he'd never known existed, straight from his chest to hers. Era, don't! Her fingers clawed for his wrist and found it. And the moment her skin met his, the glow leapt from him into her as if remembering where it belonged. Her collarbone lit, the sigil burned into life across her left shoulder, lines of wolf and moon woven together, first in the same impossible blue, then shot through with gold until both colors braided, pulsing with a cadence that was not a heartbeat, and yet was. She folded, a soft cry escaping as the light carved itself into her. Kael caught her before she hit the stone, his hands suddenly clumsy, the pain in his chest thinning to a throb that felt like breath shared between two mouths. Look at me, he said. Her eyes opened. Not the forest brown he'd learned. For an instant they were mirror bright, reflecting the sigil burning in both their skins. Tears caught in her lashes and did not fall. What did you do? He asked hoarse. What did you? She whispered. as if humor could hold the world together for 1 second more. Another flare, sharp, brief, like the snap of a snare line cutting. The banners stilled. The wolves above lowered their heads as one and pressed their muzzles to the stone. The glow softened, receded, leaving the sigils on both bodies like embers beneath ash. Silence found them. Kael realized with a kind of distant clarity that he was cradling her in the crook of his arm the way his father had once cradled a pup, too cold to live. His hand splayed across the curve of her shoulder, over his mark that was also hers. Every instinct he'd been born with wanted to cover it, to shield it, to tear down any hand that reached for it. The thought startled him so hard he almost dropped her. He forced himself to breathe. He set her carefully against the gallery's bench and rose, palms open, as if showing his empty hands could slow the wildness thundering under his skin. "This is a trick," he said to the room, to the wolves, to the snow. A priest working, a curse contrived by enemies. Era's head tipped, a small skeptical tilt, even as she pressed a shaking hand to the new brow brand blazing on her skin. "If it is, it has excellent taste in poetry." "Poetry?" She smiled weakly. "Your control issues glow real pretty." He tried not to laugh. The sound came out strangled and deeply unkingly. He raked a hand through his hair, turned on his heel, paced 3 steps, turned back. "This cannot be," he said. "It already is." He looked down at his chest. Through the linen he could still see light, blue veined with gold, pulsing where the old sigil had lived since boyhood. He remembered the pain of its first carving. The old Alpha had held him down, a ceremony of power and inheritance paid in blood. He remembered swearing, child fierce, that it would never own him. Now it answered to her. He lifted his gaze. The truth had dressed itself in every sign a king could not argue with. Wolves bowing, light obeying, a mark shared. "Say it," Era whispered. He shook his head. "Kael," she said, softer than prayer. "Say what you already know." The word crawled up from the oldest part of him, the part that remembered pick of bone, heat of pack, winter nights when breath froze in fur. "Mate," he said. The syllable trembled. "You're..." His, and he was hers. The admission opened doors he had spent years barricading. Grief flowed through, fear followed. Then something else, slower, older. A relief so profound, it felt like falling. He staggered a step back, fingers pressed to the mark, as if he could pin it still. The gallery swayed. The snow beyond the glass blurred. "I will not be ruled," he said, to the room or to the curse. He wasn't sure. "No one asked you to be," Era murmured. "You do not know what this means." Panic nipped his heels, a thing he would never confess under daylight. "If you are my mate, the council will call me witch and demand my head." She managed a breath of a laugh. "They already do." He flinched at the casual prophecy in her tone. He had intended to be the storm that bent her, the clever pressure that coaxed obedience without cruelty. Instead, the storm had broken over him. He had reached to claim and discovered that claiming, this time, claimed back. A soft thump drew his attention. One of the wolves above had leapt to the gallery and now approached them, low and slow, eyes glowing with that strange white blue reflected from their skin. A massive grey, older than the rest, scarred muzzle, one torn ear. Kael knew him, Rook. The first to follow when he took the crown. Rook stopped before Era. He lowered his head until his nose hovered above her shoulder, breath ghosting over the new brand. Then, with a gravity that turned Kael's bones to mist, the old wolf bowed. Not to the king, to her. The others followed, 4, 6, 8, silent as prayer. Heads lowered, bodies curved, a crescent of muscle and faith encircling her on the stone. Something in Kael unspooled. It should have soothed him. Instead, he felt raw, exposed, like the night the crown was placed on his head. And he understood too late. The weight was not metal, but promise. Era's fingers found the edge of the bench. She stood slowly. The walls parted at once, giving her room, as if the air around her had learned her shape and sought to match it. She faced him, swaying a little, braid loosened by the light, skin still faintly lit beneath the linen. She looked impossibly young and impossibly ancient. "What do we do?" she asked. He almost smiled at the we, almost wept at it. "We hide it," he said automatically, "until I decide how to control it," she offered. He closed his eyes. Survive it. When he opened them again, she was closer, not touching. The new law of their bodies suggested it and denied it in the same breath. He could feel her like weather, like a storm seen from the far side of a valley, lightning counting out the seconds between them. "Kael," she said. So gently his name became a balm that stung. "Your control kept your people alive, but if you try to make this another leash, it will strangle us both." He wanted to argue. He wanted to dismiss her with the weight of a throne. He wanted, absurdly, to apologize for the hurt on her skin that wore his shape. "I tried to trap you," he said finally. "I noticed. It reversed. I noticed that too." A breath slipped out of him, half laugh, half confession. "I meant to break your resolve." "You did," she said. "You broke it open." They stood, a king and a girl who was no longer just a girl, in the middle of a gallery that had survived 6 dynasties. Snow stacked against the glass like pages of unwritten history. The wolves waited, patient and certain, tails flicking in time with 2 heartbeats that were beginning to learn the same rhythm. Far off, the hour bell tolled, solemn and slow. Kael counted the notes and did not hear the number. For the first time since he took the crown, the future did not arrange itself neatly beneath his will. It reared, luminous and difficult, and he felt, against every instinct, like stepping toward it anyway. He inclined his head, not to concede, but to acknowledge. "Whatever this is," he said, "it binds you to my danger." "And you to mine," she answered. The pain in his chest settled into a steady warmth, like a coal banked in winter, closer to welcome than warning. He hated it for how right it felt. He feared it for the same reason. Boots clattered at the far end of the corridor. A guard's voice muffled, "Majesty?" Another, lower, urgent. "The council requests." Kael lifted a hand. The voices died. Somewhere a door retreated twice as far as it had come. He looked at Era, at the blue-gold ember beneath her skin that matched his, and knew there would be no untying this knot. Not with law, not with blood. Not with the old ways kings used when gentler tools failed. Horror reached for him with one hand. Awe reached with the other. He let both touch. "My control," he said quietly. To her, to himself, to the wolves and the snow and the waiting night, is no longer my own. The mark beneath his breastbone answered. One throb shared between two bodies. And the old castle, in its bones, felt the new law of the north begin to right itself. The drums began before dawn, slow, hollow, and meant to sound like judgment. Kael heard them from the highest tower of the northern palace, where the wind carried the scent of iron and incense. He stood at the window, bare-chested, the sigil beneath his skin pulsing faint blue in rhythm with a heartbeat that was no longer his alone. The snow outside looked bruised by moonlight, each flake heavy with the threat of storm. Below, in the temple courtyard, the high council gathered. 12 robed figures, their silver masks caught the pale light, each engraved with the mark of an ancient wolf, the same sigil that had once represented unity. Now it looked like a threat. Malric Thorn stood at their center. The king's advisor had always been more shadow than man. Tall, narrow-shouldered, with eyes like cracks in obsidian. He carried the authority of someone who'd buried more kings than he'd served. His voice, when he raised it, was measured and cold enough to frost the air. "The bond cannot remain," Malric declared to the assembly below. "It violates the old law. No Alpha King may bind himself to the unknown, to the witch, to the curse itself." Kael's grip tightened on the window frame until the wood groaned. "Witch." The words slithered through the hallways like smoke, curling under every door, sliding into the mouths of servants and soldiers alike. Witch. Below, the crowd murmured. Wolves restless, priests whispering scripture, guards exchanging uncertain glances. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. He turned from the window. Era stood behind him, half in shadow, wearing a simple grey gown. The mark across her shoulder glowed faintly gold against her skin, its light pulsing in quiet defiance. Her eyes met his, calm, unyielding. "They know," she said softly. "I told them nothing." "You didn't have to." Kael crossed the room to her, each step betraying the tension simmering beneath his skin. Malric will use this to tighten his hold. He's been waiting years for a reason to unmake the throne. "Then give him none," Era said, her voice gentle but steady. He stopped in front of her. "You think this can be hidden now? You carry my mark. The wolves bow when you pass. Every soldier can feel the change in the air. The curse is not quiet." She tilted her chin. "Then maybe it's not a curse anymore." Kael's expression flickered. "Don't mistake mercy for control. This bond can still destroy us both." Her gaze softened. "Maybe it's trying to save you." The drums outside shifted. 3 beats now. Sharp, deliberate. A summons. Kael turned toward the door. "Stay here." "Kael." He looked back at her, the gold in his eyes dimming to steel. "That's an order, Era." She said nothing, but he saw the truth in her silence. Orders meant little to someone who'd already been caged once by fate. The council chamber burned with cold fire. Torches lined the stone pillars, their flames white instead of gold. Purity flames meant to expose lies. The banners of the 12 houses hung limp above the dais, each embroidered with the wolf sigil of its lineage. Kael entered without his crown. his presence alone enough to still the murmuring crowd. Behind him, 2 royal wolves padded silently, Rook and Fenna, the oldest of his pack. Their eyes glowed faint blue, echoing the bond that had marked him. Malrich stood at the far end, surrounded by the council priests. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing just enough to feign respect. "The realm trembles. The curse has stirred. We must act." Kale took his seat at the throne of carved obsidian. "Then speak plainly." Malric stepped forward. "A woman has bewitched the bloodline. The royal sigil burns with forbidden light. Wolves defy command. The balance of the kingdom decays by the hour. Even the moon no longer answers the priests." "The priests," Kael said, "speak to the wind and call it God." A low hiss rippled through the chamber. Malrich didn't flinch. "We have all seen the mark, Majesty. The witch bears your sigil. Tell us, did she force your hand? Did she enchant you to her will, sir?" Kael's gaze cut through him like a blade. "No." Malric's lips curved. "Then you admit the bond?" Kael leaned forward, his voice quiet but iron. "I admit that the bond chose her." The council erupted. Chairs scraped stone. Voices clashed like swords. "Blasphemy. Madness. He's lost the throne." Malrix raised the hand, silencing them. "Then you endanger the realm willingly." Kael stood. The wolves at his side rose too, growling low. "You call it danger because you cannot control it. You call it witchcraft because it frightens you." Malric's voice sharpened. "You defy the order that has kept this kingdom alive for 1,000 years." Kael took a slow step forward. "Alive or enslaved?" A silence fell, cold and absolute. He descended the dais, each step echoing against the marble. "You built your peace on fear, Malric, on the bones of those who dared to question the curse. You kneel to a moon that never answers, while I have seen its power bleed through her hands." "Power that is not yours," Malric hissed. Kael stopped inches from him. "Not mine, not yours, but it is ours to understand." The advisor's eyes glinted like cut glass. "You sound like the first kings who fell. Love makes tyrants foolish. It blinds them until the curse devours their hearts." Kael's hand twitched near his side, the old instinct to strike. Instead, he straightened. "Love doesn't destroy kings. Fear does." Malric's voice dropped. "Then fear me, Majesty. Because if you do not act, the realm will." Kael's wolves bared their fangs, but Malric didn't step back. He knew the law protected him, for now. Then down came the sound, low, distant, unmistakable, howling. Not from the wild, from within the city. Every head in the chamber turned toward the great doors. A guard burst in, breathless, snow clinging to his cloak. "Your Majesty! The wolves! They've broken ranks. They're gathering in the lower courts. Thousands. They answer no command." The councillors murmured prayers, some crossing themselves with trembling hands. Malric's voice was calm. "You see? The bond spreads. The beasts serve her now." Kael's throat tightened. He hadn't realized how quickly it was happening, how her presence, her aura, was seeping into the pack mind of the kingdom. Wolves who had once bent only to him now turned their ears toward her. "She has corrupted them," a priest cried. "End it, sever the bond." Kael's patience cracked. Enough! His voice thundered through the hall, shaking banners and rattling torches. You would brand her a witch because she dares to live through a curse none of you understand. You would burn the only soul that might save us from it. The priest stammered. Save us from what? Kael's gaze darkened. From you. Malric's tone sharpened to a blade's whisper. You'll destroy yourself for her. Kael turned toward him fully. The glow beneath his chest bled faintly through his shirt, the sigil pulsing like a heartbeat. I already have. The words landed like prophecy. By nightfall, the palace was divided. Half the guards swore allegiance to the council. The others stayed loyal to their king. And in the middle of it all, Era sat within her chamber, the torches dimming around her as the mark across her skin throbbed with quiet pain. She felt Kael's anger through the bond, raw, alive, dangerous. When the door opened, she didn't startle. It was Rook, the old wolf. He entered silently, laid his muzzle at her feet, and looked up at her with eyes too knowing to be mere beast. She placed a hand on his head, feeling the ancient rhythm of loyalty pulsing beneath his fur. They'll come for me soon, won't they? She whispered. The wolf only blinked. In the chamber below, Kael faced the council again. The priests had circled the floor in salt and sigil dust. Malric stood in the center, holding a silver blade, the same one used in the coronation rites. This is your last chance, Majesty, he said. Renounce her, or we strike in the name of the moon. Kael looked around the room, seeing in their faces what the centuries had built. Fear disguised as piety, control wearing the mask of devotion. He felt the pulse in his chest align with the bond's rhythm. Blue light glowed faintly beneath his collar. She is no witch, Kael said quietly. She is the light the curse tried to hide. Malric sneered. Then you condemn yourself. Kael drew his own blade, the obsidian heir's sword that no priest could lift. Its edge hummed with power, the same blue light coursing through the veins of its wielder. You think I am afraid of damnation? He sneered. You forget who I am, Malric. I was born in fire. I ruled through famine. I have buried brothers and burned armies. The curse chose me. But she... He pointed toward the window, toward the unseen woman in the tower. She made me remember what it was for. Malric raised his blade. You defeat the gods themselves. Kael's voice dropped to a growl. Then let them hear me. He stepped forward, power rippling off him like heat. His eyes blazed gold, then blue, then both at once. The wolves outside howled as if answering the call. She's not my weakness, Kael said, every word vibrating through the chamber's stone. She's my salvation. The torches flared white. The salt circle shattered. And in that instant, every wolf in the city threw back its head and howled. Not to the council, not to the moon, but to her. The sound tore through the palace, wild and unstoppable, echoing through marble and bone. Malric stumbled back, eyes wide. You've doomed us all, he whispered. Kael turned toward the open window where the snow howled and the bond throbbed like a living pulse. Don't, he said softly. I've set us free. Outside, the moon burned blue, and somewhere far above, Era opened her eyes, her mark blazing gold against her heart, as the realm began to shift beneath their feet. The northern palace slept beneath a veil of snow. Outside, the world was chaos, councils fracturing, wolves howling to unseen masters, but within these walls, silence reigned. Kael had ordered the gates sealed, the god rotations halved, and the moon altars extinguished. No prayers, no visitors, no court, only the storm, the stone and her. Ira. She stood at the frostlit window, her breath clouding against the glass. The mountains rose like white flames beyond the walls, their ridges cutting the horizon in cruel beauty. The cold didn't seem to touch her. It bowed to her instead, as if the snow itself had learned her name. Kael watched from the shadows of the hall, still cloaked in the remnants of battle. The glow beneath his collar pulsed faintly. His mark, once golden and sharp, now dulled to pale blue. He hadn't told her what it meant. How could he? The truth was poison. Every heartbeat they shared fed her strength and drained his. When she turned, her eyes caught his in the dim light. "You're not resting," she said. "Neither are you." "I don't need to." He stepped closer. "Everyone needs to." She smiled faintly. "Even kings?" He should have answered. Instead, he stopped halfway across the room, because her smile had done something it shouldn't have. Softened the part of him the curse was meant to harden. The days that followed blurred like falling snow. Kael worked less, fought less, spoke less. Each dawn brought new weakness. The bond between them hummed beneath his skin, an invisible thread he could neither cut nor bear to follow. Sometimes, when he slept, he dreamed through her eyes. The scent of the forest, the warmth of light across her fingers, the ache of a memory that wasn't his. And sometimes, when she slept, she saw through his. She'd wake gasping, feeling the weight of his crown, the pressure of command, the loneliness that bled through every order he'd ever given. Once she jolted upright, whispering his name, before realizing it wasn't her dream she'd escaped, it was his. They began to share more than thoughts. At dawn, they'd walk the frozen courtyards in silence, their steps mirrored, breath rising together in clouds of silver. At night, she'd light a single candle at the altar Kael had forbidden, whispering prayers not for herself, but for the man watching her from the doorway. Half hidden in shadow, he never interrupted. He didn't believe in gods, but he believed in her voice, the way it softened the air, the way it quieted his wolf's rage. Once, he found her kneeling before the window, palms open to the moonlight. "What are you asking for?" he murmured. "Freedom," she said softly. "For both of us." He felt the burn beneath his ribs. Guilt or love. He couldn't tell which. "And what if freedom costs your life?" "Then I'll die free." Her answer was too calm, too human. It cut deeper than any blade. By the third week, his strength had halved. When he sparred with his generals in the training yard, the ground swayed beneath him. He hid the stumble by striking faster, fiercer, but every movement drained something vital. When his blade finally slipped, slicing across his palm, Era felt it across the palace. She cried out, dropping the cup she'd been holding. The moment his blood touched the snow, her shoulder flared with pain, the bond responding to injury. She ran through the corridors barefoot, ignoring the guards' startled bows. He was binding the wound himself when she burst in. "Stop," she said, voice trembling. "You're hurting yourself." Kaya looked up sharply. You felt that? Her eyes glistened. Every cut, every breath. You can't hide it anymore. He exhaled, the frost of his breath misting between them. Then you know what I've done to you. She shook her head. You didn't do this. We did. Kael's hand curled into a fist. No, I trapped you here. I made you part of my curse. Era stepped forward until only inches separated them. The warmth of her body clashed with the cold rolling off his skin. Then let me choose what to do with it. He looked down, searching her face for the fear he'd expected. There was none. Only quiet defiance, and something far more dangerous. Trust. When she touched his wrist, his wolf stilled. The bond flared bright enough to make the torches dim. Her fingers brushed the wound. The skin sealed beneath her touch, the blood vanishing into faint light. Kael's voice dropped to a whisper. What are you? Her gaze didn't waver. What you made me. That night, Kael didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of his bed, the bond pulsing like a second heart. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. He could feel her heartbeat through the silence. Steady, warm, alive. The more it comforted him, the more it terrified him, because he knew the truth now. The curse wasn't dormant. It was feeding. Every moment of tenderness, every shared dream, every touch, drew more power to her and away from him. It was the law of balance, the curse reclaiming what love had dared to give. When he closed his eyes, he saw visions. Era's hands glowing gold. His own body dissolving into mist. The throne room empty except for her. And through it all, a voice he hadn't heard in years. His mother's. The bond cannot serve two hearts, my son. It will always choose the purer one. Era woke from the same dream he did. In hers, Kael was drowning. His crown sank beside him, vanishing into the depths. She reached out but couldn't touch him. Every time she tried, the water turned to flame. She went to him without thinking, bare feet whispering against the marble. He sat at the window, back to her, the faint glow of the moon haloing his shoulders. You're fading, she said quietly. Kael didn't turn. I faced death before. Not like this. He exhaled. No, not like this. Era hesitated, then stepped closer. Tell me what it's doing to you. He finally faced her. His eyes weren't gold anymore. They shimmered with fractured blue. It's giving you what was mine. Strength, sight. The bond equalizes. Always. You rise, I fall. Tears welled in her eyes. Then I'll stop it. I'll break it. He reached out, catching her hand. If you do, I die. The silence that followed was colder than any winter. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, not to trap, but to keep himself from shaking. Era, I don't regret it. You should. He almost smiled. I should. But I don't. Her voice trembled. Why? Kael leaned forward, his forehead brushing hers. Because for the first time, I'm not a king. I'm just a man who's finally learned what it means to feel alive. The bond flared again, blue light bleeding into gold, wrapping them both in the glow of something too sacred to name. Days bled into nights. The council's rebellion grew, but Kael didn't leave the palace. He stayed with her, teaching her the old tongue, showing her how to listen to the wolves' calls, how to read the flicker of their eyes. Sometimes she'd fall asleep beside the fire, and he'd watch the flames reflect against her hair, knowing he'd give up every crown for that single moment of peace. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Era whispered, "If I could free you without dying, I would." Kael looked at her from across the room. "If freedom means losing you, I don't want it." She frowned. "That's not freedom, that's surrender." He rose, crossing the distance slowly. Then maybe surrender is the only honest thing left. When he reached her, she didn't step back. Their bond pulsed, sinking heartbeats, until it was impossible to tell whose was whose. "Kel," she breathed, "you're bleeding again." He looked down. Blood welled faintly from the edge of his sigil, seeping through the fabric. But the pain didn't matter. He only saw her, her trembling lips, her hand reaching up to touch his face, her eyes burning with the reflection of his own undoing. He caught her wrist gently. "If loving you means losing my crown." His voice cracked. "Then let the throne burn." The words hung in the air like a vow, like a rebellion whispered against the gods themselves. Outside, the storm broke, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the mountains. The wolves howled in answer, echoing the fire that had just been born inside two doomed hearts. And as the snow began to fall again, softer this time, Kael closed his eyes against the storm and kissed her. Not as king to subject, not as captor to captive, but as a man who finally understood that love, real, ruinous love, was the most dangerous war of all. The storm had not stopped since the night Kael defied the council. Snow fell in sheets that swallowed the sky, thunder echoing like drums of war. From the ramparts, the guards saw shadows moving through the white, a sea of armor and banners, each marked with the crescent sigil of the Shadow Guard. Malric Thorn had come for his king. Inside the northern palace, the air was heavy with the scent of iron and frost. Kael stood in the great hall, sword drawn, breath steaming. The glow beneath his chest pulsed weaker now, flickering like a dying ember. The curse was winning. Era was at his side, wrapped in a cloak too large for her, her golden mark hidden beneath layers of fabric. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. Fear not for herself, but for him. Kael turned toward the heavy doors. "They'll breach by dawn," he said. "Malric's hounds don't sleep." "Then we leave now," she whispered. He shook his head. "He'll follow. He wants you." Her voice trembled. "Because of the bond." "No." Kael's eyes darkened. "Because of what you are. The curse was built to bind the strong to the pure. He fears you'll end the control his bloodline forged." Era's gaze lifted. "Then let me face him." Kael's hand closed around her wrist. "You won't? I've lost too much to watch you fall." The doors boomed once, twice before splintering inward. The Shadow Guard poured through, their armor black as midnight, their blades gleaming with moon iron. Behind them, Malric entered, his cloak untouched by snow, his expression calm, almost reverent. "Majesty," he called out, his voice carrying through the chaos. "You've become exactly what I warned them of. A man undone by a woman." Kael stepped forward, his sword raised. "You mistake love for weakness." Malric smiled faintly. "And you mistake mercy for strength." With a flick of his wrist, His soldiers surrounded them. The first wave struck. Kale moved like a storm given shape. His blade split through armor and bone, but each strike cost him. Blood sprayed the marble, and with every heartbeat, his glow dimmed further. Era reached for him, her power instinctively flaring, but the air snapped with blue sparks. Chains of moon iron shot out from the guard's spears, wrapping around her wrists. She gasped as the metal hissed against her skin, burning through her strength. Kael. He turned just in time to see her collapse, the iron cutting deep, the glow beneath her skin fading to a dull shimmer. Malric's soldiers dragged her backward, her cries muffled by the clatter of armor. Kael roared, a sound half human, half wolf, and swung his blade with renewed fury. But the curse twisted his strength. His vision blurred, his limbs seizing as power turned inward. His wolf, once loyal, now fought to escape him. The ancient curse had found its balance. If he resisted fate, it would consume him instead. Malric stepped closer, watching as Kael fell to one knee. "You should have listened," he murmured. "The curse demands control. You gave it away." Kael's breath came ragged. "You think you control this kingdom, Malric? You only ever served its fiat." Malric crouched beside him, voice low and intimate. "And fear obeys me." The guards dragged Era through the broken doors, the snow swallowing her form. She didn't struggle. She couldn't. But her eyes sought Kael's one last time. He tried to rise, but his body betrayed him, every muscle locking against the invisible chains of his own blood. "Era!" She was gone into the storm. Malric straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his hands. "She'll die at dawn. The moon altar will see to it." He turned to leave, but paused by Kael's side. "You wanted control. She took it from you. Watch her die, and be king again." The words lodged like knives. The door shut behind him, leaving only silence and snow drifting through the shattered windows. Kael fell forward, his hands pressed against the frozen stone. His blood pooled beneath him, black against white. The wolves howled outside, a sound of mourning that echoed through every valley of the north. He could see it. Her execution, the altar glowing red, her body bound in moonlight. And for the first time, he knew true helplessness. Then something shifted. A voice rose inside him, deep, ancient, the wolf's voice ragged and wild. "You are not done." Kael's jaw clenched. "You turned against me. You turned against yourself," the wolf growled. "The curse is a bond of balance. Break it, and both die. Accept it, and both live." Kael's eyes snapped open, glowing gold through the darkness. "Then teach me to break the world before I break her." The wolf answered with silence. But the bond pulsed once, then again, stronger. The blue glow fled beneath his ribs, spreading through his veins like lightning. He rose slowly, unsteady but alive, gripping his sword for balance. Blood dripped from his palm as he whispered, "Then I'll be a king who dies for her." The wind outside shifted. The wolves howled again, not in mourning but in rally. Kael staggered to the shattered window. The storm had cleared just enough for the moon to pierce the clouds. A pale disk bleeding silver light across the snow. In the distance, the glow of torches marked the shadow guard's path south, toward the temple. He pressed his hand to the window, the blood steaming against the frost. "Era," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Hold on." Behind him, his wolves began to gather. 1, then 10, then 100. Eyes of gold and white filled the courtyard, silent and waiting. Kale turned toward them, the air trembling with his power. His voice dropped to a growl. "Tonight," he said, "the North remembers who it serves." And with that, the Alpha King stepped into the snow, wounded but burning with purpose, leading his wolves through the storm toward the altar, where love and death awaited their reckoning. The night bled red. The moon hung low and swollen above the frozen temple, its light spilling like liquid fire over the altar of stone. The priests circled it in silence, their faces hidden behind wolf-bone masks, their chants a low, guttural hum that made the air itself tremble. At the center of the altar, Era knelt. Chains of moon iron bound her wrists and throat, each link pulsing faintly with blue fire that bit through skin to bone. Blood streaked her arms where she'd struggled, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold. The high priest raised his staff. "By command of the council, by will of the bloodline, by decree of the moon, purge the curse that defied the crown." 100 voices joined his. The chant built to a roar. The air split open with sound. But the moon's light did not bless them. It shuddered. Far below the temple gates, a howl answered, a cry of rage and heartbreak that shook snow from the cliffs. Wolves scattered from the trees, their eyes blazing gold. Behind them came Kyle Draven, bare-chested, bloodied, half beast and half man, his sword dragging sparks across the ice. Every step burned. The curse clawed at his insides, turning muscle to fire. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He'd felt her pain through the bond. He'd felt her slipping away. At the altar, Malrich stood near the high priest, arms folded, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "Let the king arrive," he said softly, and let him see what love costs. Era lifted her head. The red light carved shadows beneath her eyes, but her gaze was steady. "You think love weakens him?" she whispered. "It terrifies you." Malric's expression didn't change. "Love terrifies no one. Loss does." He turned to the priests. "Continue." Lightning split the clouds. The wind hauled. The chant rose again until the temple doors exploded inward. Kael strode through the wreckage, his wolf half freed, his veins lit with molten light. The guards rushed him, but their blades shattered on contact. He didn't fight with precision anymore. He fought like nature itself, wild, unbound, unstoppable. The closer he came, the stronger the curse burned. His eyes flickered between gold and blue, his breath coming in growls. "Release her!" he roared. The high priest pointed his staff. "You defy the moon's will." "The moon doesn't command me," Kael spat. "She does." He swung his blade. The staff splintered. The priest scattered. Malric stepped forward, calm amid chaos. "And now you've doomed us all. The bond has corrupted you, Kael. You're no king, just a beast in love with his own undoing." Kael staggered closer, blade dripping, chest heaving. Better a beast with love than a man without a soul. Malrik lunged first, steel flashing. They clashed beside the altar, iron against moonlight. Sparks flew, blood spattered, the sound of war filled the temple. Kael's strength faltered. The curse surged again, forcing him to his knees. Malric's blade drove deep into his side. "You see?" he hissed. "This is what love costs. Your throne, your strength. Your name." Kael grabbed the blade and pulled it deeper until the hilt met his ribs. Blood ran hot down his arm. His eyes, glowing dimly now, lifted toward Era. "Then I'll pay it all." Malrik drew back to strike again, but Era moved. With one desperate motion, she twisted against her chains until her wrists bled. The moon iron burned, smoke rising from her skin, but the bond answered her call. The blue light within her veins ignited gold. The chains snapped. "Kael!" Her voice broke the chant, the storm, the world. He turned toward her, eyes wide, the glow of her light reflected in his own. She stumbled to him, falling to her knees beside his body. His breath came shallow, his wolf's growl fading to a whisper. "You were never cursed to love," she whispered, pressing a hand to his chest, blood mingling with tears. "You were cursed to forget how." The moment her palm met his heart, the world erupted. Their marks, his gold, hers blue, merged in a blaze of light so bright it blinded the priests. The curse screamed as it broke, shattering through the temple in waves of energy. The flames turned silver, devouring the chains, the altars, the banners of the Shadow God. Malrik's scream was the last sound before silence. His body burned to ash. His shadow etched into the stone like a scar. Outside, the wolves howled. Not in rage this time, but in reverence. They knelt in the snow, heads bowed toward the light spilling from the temple. The blood moon faded. White light returned to the sky. When the storm finally died, only two figures remained amid the ruin. Era, her hair silvered by moonlight, and Kael collapsed in her arms. His chest still and pale, she touched his face, trembling. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Not now." No answer. Her tears fell onto his skin, glowing faintly as they hit. The wolves gathered at the shattered gates, silent, waiting. Then, as the moon reached its zenith, Kael's hand twitched. His breath returned, a slow, trembling exhale. And when his eyes opened, they were no longer gold or blue, but pure white, reflecting the moon itself. The curse was gone. The king who had been bound by power was free, because love had finally broken what control never could. And in the snow-lit stillness of dawn, Era whispered the vow that would outlive them both. "You set a trap to own me, Kael Draven, but it was I who caught your heart." Dawn came slowly, hesitant after so much blood and ruin. The snow no longer fell. It glittered. The moon had fled, leaving behind a pale gold horizon and air that shimmered with the scent of iron and ash. The world was quiet, too quiet, as if the realm itself held its breath. Era knelt in the silence beside Kael's body. The fires had burned themselves out, leaving only ribbons of smoke curling from the altar's cracked stone. Around her, the wolves waited in still reverence, their heads bowed low. The light of the returning sun brushed over Kael's chest, catching on the faint scars where the mark had once been. She brushed his hair from his forehead, her voice breaking on a whisper. You promised me a dawn, Kael Draven. I've come to collect it. The wind stirred. And then, slow, fragile but undeniable, his chest rose. A breath, rough as stone but alive. Era froze, her hands trembling. His eyes opened. They weren't the cursed gold of power, nor the burning blue of the bond. They were silver, clear and calm, like moonlight on water. The eyes of a man freed. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The world fell away. No throne, no curse, no blood. Just two souls, once caught in chains of fate, now holding each other in the stillness after the storm. When Kael finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, almost disbelieving. You broke it! Era shook her head, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. No, we did. He smiled, a rare, human smile that softened the sharpness of his gaunt soul and made him look years younger. He reached up, his hand cupping her face. Then let it never bind us again. She leaned into his touch. Then let it never rule us again. By midday, the temple was gone, collapsed under the weight of the shattered magic. But from its ashes, something new began. Kael stood on the steps with Era beside him. The wolves spread in ranks below, the first sunlight crowning the horizon like fire across snow. The surviving soldiers of the north, those who had once called her witch and him fallen, dropped to their knees. The light spilling from Kael's mark was not gold, not a warning, but silver white, a symbol of balance. He raised his voice, strong but quiet enough that every ear strained to hear. Power once ruled the north, he said. Fear kept it breathing. Blood kept it chained, but no more. His gaze found Era. A kingdom cannot be ruled by those who fear love. A bond cannot be sacred if it demands control. The crowd stirred, whispers running like wind through the ranks. Era stepped forward, her cloak billowing behind her like a living flame. We do not rebuild with dominance, she said softly. We rebuild with devotion, with mercy, with choice. From the hills, the packs began to howl, not as soldiers, but as kin. The sound rolled across the valleys, shaking frost from the mountains, carrying far beyond the ruins of the old north. That night, fires burned across every village, not in rebellion or mourning, but in renewal. Weeks later, the great hall of the rebuilt palace gleamed again, its marble scrubbed clean of blood, its walls carved with new sigils, the intertwined wolf and moon. Kael walked its corridors no longer as the cursed Hing, but as something humbler, more dangerous, a man learning to live without chains. Era walked beside him, her hands still rough from rebuilding, her laughter echoing in rooms once built for command. They ruled together, not as Alpha and Luna, not as captor and captive, but as equals. When they spoke as one. When they argued, the wolves outside the walls would pause, listening not for war, but for wonder. Because even their quarrels carried warmth now. The council was gone. The packs were united. And the north, long bound by law and curse, began to breathe again. In the heart of the new temple, built atop the ruins of the old, stood an altar of crystal, carved from the mountain's spine. Upon its face glowed an inscription written in flame that never faded, revealed only under moonlight. The king who set a trap for love was the one ensnared by it. The priest said the words had appeared the night the curse broke, carved by no mortal hand. Era ran her fingers over the letters one night when the moon was full. Kale watched her from the doorway, his silver eyes reflecting firelight. "Do you think it's true," she asked, "that you were the one trapped?" He stepped closer, smiling faintly. "You think I ever escaped?" She laughed, turning toward him. "You build the sweetest trap to prove you couldn't love." He reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you stepped into it and proved I could never stop." Outside, the wolves howled again, but this time it wasn't war they were calling for. It was peace. It was the sound of a kingdom reborn, not through fear, but through fire, devotion, and the kind of love that no curse, no throne, and no crown could ever contain. And as the moon rose high above the north, its light caught the silver in their eyes, crowning them not with power, but with the one truth that had survived every storm. Love, freely given, was the only rule worth obeying.